final thing I'd like to show you is how to use your Baby Lock Unity to stitch bobbin work. Bobbin work is one of my very favorite embroidery techniques because it allows us to use super thick threads that you can't use in the needle, but we'll place them in the bobbin. So the first step that we want to do is to make sure that we've got the needle in the highest position because we need to change the bobbin case. So I'm going to use my needle position button. I'll drop the needle down one time and then bring it right back up again. And that makes sure, like I said, that the needle's in the highest position and that everything is lined up so that we can easily change out the bobbin case. Now I'm going to slide off the bobbin cover just by kind of pulling it toward me, just like that. And the machine is letting me know that that has been removed. I'll take out the bobbin that's in the machine and now take out the bobbin case. We want to make sure that for bobbin work, we're using this gray accessory Bobbinwork bobbin case. If ever you need to adjust the tension on the bobbin case so that those thick threads can easily come through, you want to do it on this accessory bobbin case, not the one that comes with your machine. You can use one of the little skinny screwdrivers that comes with it and just loosen that screw. And you're literally only going to turn the screw an eighth or a quarter of a turn every single time. You don't need to loosen it a whole lot. Now we're going to drop that into the machine and we want to make sure that the triangle on the bobbin case is lined up with the circle on the inside of the machine, just like I showed you earlier in the video. So I'll drop that down in, make sure everything's aligned and that it sits in there nice and flat and straight. Now I'll replace the bobbin cover, slide it in, just like that, and we can move on to the next step. Now we need to select one of the Bobbinwork embroidery designs, and they can only be found in the embroidery screen, not in embroidery edit. If you try to select one from the embroidery edit screen, it actually won't allow you to stitch it out because those Bobbinwork designs are pre-digitized to work perfectly with extra heavy threads in the bobbin. So you don't have the ability to make adaptations or changes to the Bobbinwork designs. You have to use them exactly as they are in the machine because again, they've been digitized precisely how they need to be for you to have beautiful bobbin work. So we'll go into embroidery. And this category here, the little fleur-de-lis with the bee, that stands for bobbin work. So I'll select a design. There are several of them built in, and I'm going to choose this design right here because it'll fit in my 5x7 hoop, and then simply touch embroidery. And again, it takes us right into the main embroidery screen. Now, when you're working with bobbin work like this, we need to make an adjustment to the tension of the machine. And we can do that easily by using this little tensions and cutting icon. This is where we would shut off the automatic jump stitch trim. The machine does that for us automatically for bobbin work, but if ever you need to do that in a design, this is where you would do it. This is also where we find the tension. And for bobbin work, you want to adjust the tension somewhere between 6 and 8. So we'll go to number 7. Right here you can see. And that just adjusts how hard the needle thread is going to pull on the bobbin thread as you stitch. So we can leave that screen up and the next step is to wind a bobbin. So I've got an empty bobbin here and a spool of heavyweight thread. This is the Madeira Katona. It's really thick, heavy cotton thread. One of my very favorites for bobbin work. You could use a thin ribbon, you can use thin yarns. Madeira makes a version of this called Decorator that's got a little bit of sheen to it. It's a rayon. Any of those fancy threads will work. I'm going to place that onto the bobbin winding spool pin, and we want to make sure we use a spool cap. So I'm just going to borrow it from our needle thread, just like that. And we'll follow the normal path to the bobbin winding, just like this. Take my empty bobbin, place it on the pin, give it a little twist so it snaps into place, just like that. And now I'm going to wind my thick thread a few times around the bobbin and cut. Now with bobbin work, it's really important to make sure that you wind your bobbin at the slowest speed so that it doesn't get away from us. So when I move the lever over to start winding and the message appears on screen, I'm just going to make sure that it's all the way at the slowest setting and then touch start and keep an eye on your thread as it's winding. So even though it's on the slowest speed, it fills up pretty quick because it's really thick thread. So now I can cut the bobbin thread off and we'll place it into the bobbin case. There we go. And I've got to make sure it's a little too thick to cut with the cutter on my bobbin winder. So I'll use my snips. I'm going to take that thread off because I don't want it getting caught in anything. And I just need to make sure that I put my spool cap back on my needle thread. Now you do still have to have a needle thread with this, obviously. And it's a good idea to use a color that kind of blends in with your fabric, which is what I've got. I'm going to be stitching on a light colored fabric. So I'll insert my bobbin. Get it into the tension. And we are going to end up pulling up the bobbin thread in a minute, all the way up to the surface of our fabric. And again, it might be kind of hard to cut just because it's so thick. So when you work with bobbin work, what is going to appear on the pretty side is the bobbin thread. So instead of hooping with your fabric on top, you're actually going to hoop with your stabilizer on top. Your needle thread is just going to be there to anchor everything together. But again, all the magic happens, all the beautiful work will be on the underside of your hoop. So you might have thought, why do you have that hooped upside down? This is what you have to do for bobbin work. You literally work in reverse. So I've got my right side of my fabric face down on the wrong or the bottom side of the hoop, and stabilizer is on top. Now I'm going to attach my hoop. Okay, there we go. And to take the very first step of bobbin work, as always, the machine, when we go into embroidery, takes us to the center needle position, but we want to move to the first stitch. So I'm going to close out of my tension screen and touch that needle position key and advance +1 stitch. That will take me up to where the very first stitch will begin stitching. If you don't advance to that first stitch and you leave it in the center position, when you begin stitching, the machine's going to move to the first stitch position and it extends a tail of your beautiful thread all the way across the hoop. And it's kind of hard to get that out after the fact. If it gets stitched in, it's very difficult to retrieve that thread tail. So just by touching that +1, it takes you up to the very first stitch. And now we're going to pull up the bobbin thread so that it comes to the surface of the fabric, or our stabilizer as we have on top, and that way we can ensure that we don't have the tail of our bobbin thread getting stitched underneath of anything on the pretty side of our project. So to pull up the bobbin thread, I like to pull a nice long tail of my needle thread, and I'm just going to kind of hold on to it. And now using the needle up down button, I'm going to lower the needle once and then bring it right back up again. And now I'm going to reach in and just kind of pull on the needle thread gently from both sides until that bobbin thread comes up to the top. See that? We've got the bobbin thread pulled right up to the surface. So I'm going to hold these two threads together for the first few stitches, and then I'll stop, tie them off and cut, and then continue on. So I'll lower the presser foot and tell it to start. Now, one of the cool things that I should mention before we begin, when we select a bobbin work design, the machine automatically adjusts the sewing speed. It's going to embroider fairly slowly so that the machine has a chance to pull up all that beautiful bobbin thread, and it also gives me the opportunity to hold on to the thread without it getting away from me. So now we'll start. I've taken a few stitches and I'm at a point where I can easily reach those threads, and I'm just going to tie the two threads together in a knot. So I've got my top thread and my bobbin thread, and I'm just going to tie it in a little bow, or a knot really. There we go. There's one loop. And this is going to help to keep that thread nice and secure at the end of my stitching. And now I can, now that it's tied in a knot, trim off some of that excess thread. And I don't have to worry about it coming loose after I'm done embroidering. So we'll let it start again. Our design is finished, but our work isn't quite yet done. You can see that the machine has stopped with the needle down and it did not cut my threads, and that's by design. The machine automatically shut off the needle thread cutter and the bobbin thread cutter because we need to be able to get that bobbin thread back to the stabilizer side of our project. So the first step here is to lift the needle, and it pulls kind of a long tail. And I like to even give myself a little bit longer tail when I cut this. We don't want to cut the thread right at the very surface of the stabilizer. We want to give ourselves a nice long tail just like this. Now I'm going to make sure that the presser foot's lifted up and remove the hoop very gently. And it did not cut that bobbin thread yet. So I'm going to give myself, again, a nice long tail. And now we can see our beautiful bobbin work design. I've got a little thread caught underneath it there. I'm just gonna pull out. There we go. There's our beautiful bobbin work design. So you can see that thick thread right up on the surface of the fabric. Those little white dots are from the needle thread. You might want to use, if you don't like that effect, a blue thread that matches your blue bobbin thread. I think it looks kind of cool that way. I actually like the texture that it gives. And then what you would do with your tail is to take a hand stitching needle, wind the tail through the eye of the needle and drop it down into the needle hole from the very first stitch. Take it through to the back side, and then you can tie it off just like we did with our beginning stitches. That's what's going to keep all of your bobbin thread from coming out and give you just a very complete and beautiful look. Now what I did there, it does tend to kind of pull loose a little bit. See that? If I pulled on the bobbin thread, you can kind of pull that needle thread loose. But because we have a nice long tail, we can pull it back, just like that, hold it tight until you bring that tail thread down to the underside of your fabric. Just like when you're playing with different decorative stitches, it's really important with bobbin work like this to stitch out a sample before you put this onto your actual project. Different threads, different stabilizers, different fabrics are all going to behave differently. I had adjusted my needle tension all the way up to a 7, but you may find that you need to take that needle tension up even higher just to get rid of some of those little dots of thread that you see and to allow a little bit more of that beautiful bobbin thread just to kind of stack up on the surface of your fabric. Different fibers that you put into your bobbin are going to behave differently on the surface of your fabric too. So definitely take a little bit of time, get some really fun, pretty threads to play with, wind them on a bobbin, and just practice stitching out a lot of those designs that are built in. You can even turn them into a sampler. Take all those test sews and turn them into a sampler quilt. It turns out really pretty. And then you'll know exactly what settings you like best with your favorite threads.